you grew up in a Christian home, and I'm like the fourth generation pastor. So lots of pastors in my
Yeah.
in our lineage. Um, but in many ways, that's your experience. Our whole family's experience was also a reawakening of sorts. I think a opening up of our faith understanding or spiritual understanding, and I think we're probably still in the process of um, allowing our soul or spirits to be reshaped and expanded. And I don't know if you
Mhm.
want to talk a little bit about what that is like. That the angst we felt in our, I guess, a very traditional church experience or typical spiritual experience in a church. What that
Yeah.
was like, and then how are we looking at it now, or how are you looking at it now?
hmm I think yeah, I think it was really tough just being in a such a conservative Christian environment. It did feel really suffocating at times. Um, yeah, I think because I went to like a private Christian school, and so that was just built into the school system too. And just
Mm.
getting that all the time, that was really really tough, especially in the place that I was at because I wasn't doing too well. And I guess the most common thing, it's hard enough without like religion being brought into it. Like just getting like these suggestions from people or people telling you, oh, you should just try this, you should just try that. And it just feels like, well, I already like do you think I haven't thought of that? It's my life. I'm the one who has to deal with this problem 24/7. Do you think like I haven't tried that already? And to get that with religion packed on top of it or packed into it, it just gives it this tone of this moral superiority or this moral judgment. And there was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of moral judgment just packed into like the things that people would say innately, just because when things are talked about in a religious sense, you know it often just has this like good or bad value like attached to
Mm-hmm.
it. And so especially with like mental illness, a lot of times people will like associate mental illness with sin, or say
Mm-hmm.
that mental illness is a sin, or being depressed or being anxious
Mm-hmm.
is a sin, or that suicide is like the worst sin. And
Mm-hmm.
that never felt good because it's not like I was trying to hurt anyone. And I mean, you could say that, a lot of times people just sin and and they're not trying to sin, but people fall into sin. But it's like that really wasn't helpful at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
it just felt very, very alienating. And yeah, I know. And I guess, like I think we all experienced a lot of us in the family like experienced people, if we went to confide in someone, we'd often be met with just, oh, here's the Bible verse, like here's another Bible
Mm-hmm.
verse. You go to another person, give you another Bible verse. It's kind of just like throwing Bible verses at you because like they don't know what else to say or like
Mm-hmm.
what else to do. And it's like I get it, it's tough, like I wouldn't know what to do. But at the same time, I think that just having religion in it just ended up being something that was a lot more hurtful. Just I think primarily because of the judgment. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that personally, in my experience, having the religion like tied into the school system made it really, really kind of complicated because I think the way I was kind of treated at times when I was going to school, there were periods of times, like that I was out of school or wasn't like was taking a break from school or doing school online rather than in person when I was still attending that private Christian school. But I think that because I was depressed and because I was kind of a rare case. I think that a lot of the staff didn't know what to do with me. And I'm sure it was scary for them too. But
Mm. Yeah.
I just remember the way it was handled. I was, kind of treated like a virus, treated like, oh, we got to contain this. We got to get rid
Hmm.
of it. And yeah, so there were periods of time where, like I wasn't allowed like on campus, or wasn't allowed to do this or that, or had to be watched, or had to be supervised. um yeah, that, and like different things that I would hear from like different people about like what
Hmm.
staff or what students have said about me or my family. And I mean, and then this kind of like sentiment kind of extended to some of my friends too. And I was having a conversation with a friend the other day. um she also has struggled with similar things. And
Hmm.
she also described feeling like this. That's the way she said it, that she felt like, we were being treated like like we were viruses.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, and so I think that because it was a little complicated, because it is a school, and they have to function a certain way. But just to have religion tied into it, and just to constantly
Hmm.
have people like the staff who kind of represent the religion bring religion into it and have to make these decisions, it just made it a little kind of complicated and very hurtful. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think um, a lot of Christianity is about uh, exhibiting the right behavior and having right control, and that seems to override everything else. Like everything is judged black and white as a like having your behavior as an indication of you're good or bad or right or wrong.
mhm.
Uh, but not realizing that there are many aspects where it's much bigger and beyond our capacity. So I think even just understanding how the brain works, we begin to realize that hey, there are actually a lot of dysfunctions there. That's not so much. It's not a moral thing. It's not a. I wouldn't even say it's a right or wrong thing. And so how do you even evaluate sin in that sense, right? So how do we think sin, and also how does God look at you um, when we are in that state of incapacity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think overall, you also went through a kind of a spiritual rebirth or reawakening, and I think our whole family did in one way or another. Even as far back as when we were still in the States, you were doing neurofeedback, and we went to you went through this like a small group uh, that talks about healing and renewal, and that culminates in a 1 day kind of retreat esque kind of
Mhm.
experience. I don't know if you remember some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that largely, like spiritually for me, what that did, because I am a Christian, but I think that, I mean, it is a little like, I don't know, tricky to describe, because my idea of what being a Christian is still so different from what somebody else might call a Christian. And so, and my own understanding of being a Christian has changed over time a lot too. And so I think that that class for me, I think it was just really good as an example of what a Christian environment could be when it wasn't, I guess, wasn't so toxic. So I think I was in a pretty toxic Christian environment before, because I think a lot of, I guess, there's a lot of oversimplification of, I guess, life in general, and issues and problems, and I guess this general, I guess, unwillingness to acknowledge and see that there are difficult things in life. And so I think that when I was in a Christian environment where that stuff was, I guess, where people were willing to look at the ugly side of life, then
Mm-hmm.
that felt good. That felt like something
Mm-hmm.
I could get on board with. Because I think that, growing up, I feel like I've always kind of had like a love-hate relationship with Christianity or with my faith or with religion. And I think in a lot of ways it is very toxic because I think that like sin and salvation, everything is framed in a way, or like repentance, all that kind of thing is framed in a way that really like it it promotes it can promote self-hate. And I think it's very,
Mm-hmm.
very, very easy to fall into that. And I think I really, really,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
bought into that. And I think that, that is one of the things that like drove my self-harm, for example. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was just a very unhealthy like mindset to be in. And being in that Bible course, that was helpful in that like I could it was an environment where people wanted to address the bad things or the ugly things and the problems in life in a space of non-judgment. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like where everybody was willing to say like, oh, I have this issue and that issue, and that, we're not here to say that, like we're not here to say that you're bad or you're condemned for doing this, but
Mm-hmm.
that we all want to get better. And I think that that was one good step towards seeing, I guess, seeing right and wrong, or seeing life not so much in terms of sin. Because I think we are just focusing way too much on sin, or it's like a hyper focus on sin or the bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And because there are so many things, like countless things that you're not supposed to do, just don't do that, don't do this. And I think that way of thinking just, I think it's very common, but I don't think it's very helpful. I
Mm-hmm.
think that just knowing how people work too, motivationally, or like how to, like if you look at like training a dog, for example, like you don't, they don't function so well when you like punish them for doing something like that they did wrong, like like some punishment or acknowledgement is good of what they of what they did if they messed up, but positive reinforcement is so much more powerful behaviorally, because
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how our brain works in learning. And so when you reward good behavior, we get a little bit of dopamine and we learn to reinforce that behavior or reinforce that association with the thing that is
Mm-hmm.
good. And so I think if we're looking at like a learning perspective, it's more powerful, or you can make more powerful change through positive reinforcement. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that if that applied to like Christianity or religion or behavior, I think that would look more like shooting for something rather than not doing these things. So I think
Mm-hmm.
sin is really focusing on like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. But I would so much rather have an example of what to do rather than what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's, like, I think it just works out better that way. And also you get rid of the like judgment and all of the
Yeah.
pain that causes, because that is something so huge that pushes so many people away.
Yeah, I feel that ultimately they impact our picture of who God is. I think what we were, I grew up with, you grew up with, I think a lot of the typical church experiences is that we have a very angry and scary God, and it's always about me doing either good thing or bad thing. There's like nothing in between. There's no,
Mm-hmm.
almost like no learning in between where you can try, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so understanding that in fact God is not like that. He's loving and he's unconditionally accepting and loving to begin with, and how because he's like that, we can be like that toward others and toward ourselves. I felt that was a significant lesson for At least for me, I remember. I think for you and I in particular, we didn't have a very good relationship. I mean, you always behaved, you acted, properly whenever I'm home. But I also remember you said that you hated me, right? And I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, and that didn't really change until a moment. I think it was one time when you had a really bad case of cutting in the bathroom, and you just locked yourself in. It was all bloody, um, and it was at that moment when I think it's literally this Holy Spirit reminding me that it's what you needed at that moment. It's not more control or more judgment or behavioral condemnation, but what you needed at that moment is God's nature, which is unconditionally accepting. And so it's not about control, and that I need to trust that that's how God is, and that's how I need to be. I think it's uh, the turning point in our relationship was really at that time, and I think I'm still learning more and more how important that is, that unconditional, the way God interact with us with that unconditional love and acceptance. It's not about all the black and whites and the judgment, and God is not like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't realize it was like that just a one moment for you. I honestly don't really remember. Like I don't have a good picture of a timeline of that whole time, but yeah, I guess I do remember. I remember thinking that like, oh, I hate my dad at some point. But yeah, like I do think that, like over time, because I think that like in most Christian environments, at least the Christian environments that I've been in, um, I wasn't able to see this picture of this unconditionally loving God, and and I'm sure like we hear it all the time that God's
Mm-hmm.
unconditionally loving and that like His love is so great and blah blah blah, but there's
Mm-hmm.
I really had no picture of it. Like no picture of it, not even in church or like not from any church figures and not from the Christian authority figures around me at all. And I think that like seeing it from you was when I started to I feel like understand that Christianity isn't so bad or doesn't have to be so bad. If there's a God that's like this or that actually cares about me like this, or that would deal with me like this, then like I can start to I can get with it, like
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense because I think that like I think with a lot of issues people have that yeah it isn't judgment or control that they need, but I guess people need love and acceptance, and I think that it's only after that because I think people don't even a lot of people don't even accept themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
they're also judging themselves, and and
Yeah.
it's not that we don't want to acknowledge that there's something wrong, but I think that that's the first step in starting to get better, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that like in a Christian environment that's it's really hard to see that, but yeah, that I think that was a turning point.